that everything you do leads to a finished product that keeps the customer happy. So hands up everybody who is currently a project manager. Okay, hands up the rest of people who are aspiring project managers. Okay, after this session there will be no hands raised. I know, I'm kidding. So on average, how many projects do you manage at one time? Hands up everybody for 5 or more. Okay, this session is for you. So this is why we're calling it Project Management 201. We are talking about ways in which to manage advanced projects, in other words, that are larger than just maybe like a simple basic e-commerce site, ones that involve multiple stakeholders, usually at least 20, including staff, including managing job functions that you yourself have never performed, which is where a really big challenge comes in for a lot of project managers. It's also about long-term projects with multiple milestones and a lot of deliverables, some of which are difficult to measure. So I have over the years, and I've been a project manager for about a decade, come up with the essentials of what creates a perfect, wonderful project that leaves everybody happy at the end. Solid communications, just enough control over all of the resources, human and otherwise, client or leadership 100% enthusiastic support, your team at optimum flow, in other words, challenging themselves enough to be interested in their work, but not so much that you spend more time learning than you spend delivering on your project, and sufficient resources to make it all happen. And I actually had the privilege a little while ago of talking to and sitting down with a gentleman who has these sorts of things happen with his projects on a regular basis. And here he is. Unless you are a unicorn, one of these things, at least one of these things, is not likely to happen on your projects. So in other words, you're going to have people assigned to the project whom you either hired or whom you inherited, who don't have the skill sets that they were supposed to have. You're going to have a lack of 100% support from the client or stakeholders because maybe the person who supported the project has moved on, or there was never that much support for it to begin with, but someone decided it had to happen. You're going to be under-resourced. Quick show of hands, who has never had an under-resourced project? I'm just seeing laughter here. So you have that as a handicap, but I have developed some strategies to get around some of these. So although you may not be this guy, and I call him Herb, and he has never come into our office, you can find ways to work around some of these, or at least over-optimize on the things you can control so that you have a little bit of padding and room for the things that you cannot. So number one thing that I see causing projects to go off the rails or cause a lot of needless stress for people is poor communications. Now, sometimes it can't be helped because you might have a client who, for instance, and this has happened to me, when you ask them what they want, they say, we want it to be creative. Or, it should have a lifestyle-y feel. And then you send them draft after draft, and they say, but I don't think this is creative, and you beg them to define creative for you. And they say, I don't know, it just should be, creative. So sometimes you can't help that, but there's other things where you can help some things. And by the way, the person who just keeps saying blue or whatever, there's ways to work around that as well. So first thing is, have a conscious plan in your mind of how you are going to communicate with people. Has anyone here done any Myers-Briggs testing on your team or knows their Myers-Briggs type? A couple of people. It's extremely helpful. It's also extremely helpful to just do a gut check. And in fact, when I teach project management courses to people training for their project management certification, there's actually a grid you go through where you check off people's personal qualities related to how they like to communicate. Are they assertive? Are they unassertive? Are they clear? Are they vague? And you take every single stakeholder within the organization and you check off their communication style on a grid. And then you eat that piece of paper, because if they see it, they will hate you forever. Because you might end up writing things like, Bill is very vague, and just keep saying things should be creative. So, but make a note within yourself that if somebody is a vague communicator, you're going to need to some extent overcompensate for that, or maybe they're only vague with words. I've worked with a lot of developers and designers who, if you ask them to articulate in words what they are doing, they may just say blue or creative. And the clients are like that too. But if you ask them to draw it or sketch it, or you allow them to communicate in a different way, they can communicate very clearly. I have developers on my team that I communicate with by simply drawing what we need to do, and it saves hours, because they're visual people and not verbal people. So try to communicate with people, sit down, take a little bit of time. Again, maybe step away from your office so that you can get perspective on people better, and honestly assess people's communication styles and make sure that you're looking at them objectively versus through your biases. Like, I'm a very verbal person, so anybody less verbal than me seems like a visual communicator. So make sure that you look at them clearly and rate their communication style, and then communicate in their preferred channel in a style that they like. I have had clients who, honestly, I will tell you, I've had a client who was unhappy recently because she needed to have everything emailed to her at the end of the day so she could print it out. So using Asana was freaking her out because she didn't know where to print it out, and she was like really, really unhappy. She never told me that she needed to have everything emailed to her at the end of the day to print it out, but there's people like that, and that's their preferred channel. So if that person's a really important client to you, or a key team member whose contributions are incredibly valuable, and they need to print stuff out, hopefully that's your client. Hopefully you're not employing somebody who needs to print stuff out, because if you're a web design shop, that would be a big problem. But communicate in a style that people prefer, and you will get rid of a large amount of the friction in communications, but you first have to do an assessment. And do it at a pace that people can keep up with, because some people will shut down if you over-communicate with them. Some people turn off Slack in the middle of the day because they just can't stand all of the, there's juice in the fridge communications. So if somebody wants to hear from you in a summary at the end of the day, and you can do that, because otherwise they will start turning you out. On the other hand, you sometimes have to be kind of reasonable. So this is an actual grid that we use in some of my other courses. You look at specific traits like decision-making, approach with others, general attitude, use of time, movement, if you're having a lot of meetings, and appearance is more just like their style. Are they informal or casual or not super casual? Get a sense of how people like to communicate. So, because if somebody is very on the impersonal and business-like spectrum, and you keep sending them emails that just say, hey, with 2 Y's at the end, your email might be incredibly important. And if you're wondering why they're never signing off on something you send them, it might be that the minute they see, hey, with 2 exclamation points and 2 Y's at the end, they shut down. Because they're so formal in their communication style, you've already lost them at hello. So you might be getting better sign-offs with them if you just say, hi, Sam, or hi, Susan. But Susan actually is an informal, fun person and would not tune it out. Yes?
So aside from just making mental notes about these styles and preferences for communication, do you actually annotate this? Do you document this for your team members and everything?
I not only document this, but I'm actually teaching project management at a college here, and I assigned this as homework last week. There's literally a grid that I had people print out and annotate everybody they work with. And I said, I swore myself to secrecy because, this can be sensitive, because if you say somebody's undisciplined, you don't want to circulate that around the office. But if somebody is undisciplined, that may mean you need to be more proactive in communicating with them. But yes, I annotate it. I write it down. And I might not keep it in a place where people can find it. I might not keep it for long term. But I do make a note that if somebody really can't stand to be informally communicated with, I'm not going to text them. But if they're always texting me, and that's the easiest way to reach them, then if I need them to sign off on something critical, I'm going to text them first. But that said, you obviously have to consolidate, and you don't want to allow what you see in some organizations where there's 2 people you communicate with via email, There's 3 people who will only respond if you walk over to their desk and stare at them. There's a couple of people who respond only to texts. And then there's people who play Pokemon Go while on conference calls. You do not want to have to be spending a huge amount of your time just accommodating other people's eccentric preferences. So when we talk about going to this grid, sure, you want to know if somebody's more factual, more objective, and then you're going to get them, you're going to win their sign off by giving them hard facts as to why this design choice is necessary versus someone being more emotional. You're going to want to gain their enthusiasm, but that doesn't mean that you're faxing stuff to people who have to be faxed to, walking over to people who have to be walked over to, because there's a couple of things. One, you've now become your team's doormat because you're doing their work for them. And 2, you've got 40 different folders with the same thing in them. So also be willing to have people meet you maybe, I say 1/3 of the way, and train them on project management software, but take the time. A lot of powerful project management tools, like who here is using a project management tool? Good, it's most of the room. So Asana, Basecamp, there's different ways of setting up communications in them. You can have it email you with notifications. You can turn that off and you go in. So a good project management tool is going to accommodate several different communication styles. You can put visuals in there. You can put verbal descriptions in there. So if you feel confident in the tool that you're using, but you feel that people don't understand that they can, hey, you can get emails. Email lady who needs to have everything emailed to her, she can have Basecamp or Asana email her. You might have to train people, however, that is available. And then finally, force people to do it. If somebody doesn't answer messages you send to them in Asana or Basecamp, and everybody else has gotten on board with you Slack things to each other and you send messages in Asana, well, guess what? After a while, the fountain of information is going to get shut off. You'd be amazed at how quickly people become compliant with using project management software if the only way they can get the information and the resources that they need to do their job are in the files contained within your project management software. So one of the things I think that good project managers do, because a lot of us are empaths, even though we're very analytical, is that we can tend to over-enable people. It's one thing to support your team and train them, but if somebody doesn't answer emails after 7 goes because you have to text them to get an answer, you're becoming their enabler. They need to stop. They need to get on board with the same way everybody else communicates. And the easiest way to do that is to shut them out of any other channel of communication if it has truly become a colossal inconvenience to you. Unless they're your client, right? You're saying, well, Christina, I can't do this with my clients. I have a client who only communicates via semaphore signal, and I can't, do anything other than learn semaphore to communicate with this person, except on Thursdays when they communicate via Morse code. Think about this. Are you using hours tracking? Are you tracking every billable hour and every hour you bill? I would bet you anything the client who cannot comply with your project management requirements is costing you money. You are spending more hours on that person, and unless they actually literally pay for every hour, including internal administrative hours, if you're on retainer with these people, you are losing money. I would bet you anything. I mean, $50 says if you have a client who has eccentric communication needs that you have to stand on your head to comply with, unless you are on very strict billable hours where you bill them for every time you have to go out of your way just to get them to approve the thing they told you to do, you are losing money on them. Take a month. If you are complying with anybody's eccentric communication requests, take a month, but this will probably become apparent even after a week, and track every extra hour you spend dealing with that. And I will bet you anything that you are dealing with a non-profitable entity of some kind, and that you have to either make them shape up or raise your rates with them. And be transparent. Say, listen, everybody else, all of our other clients we talk to via Asana, and we have to fax you stuff. We're going to start charging $20 per sheet when we fax you things. That works unbelievably well. It stops. And if the client really blows up at you, they were probably needy in 1,001 different ways as well. So one of the things you do have to kind of learn is to schedule postmortems, but also during mortems. So who here does a debrief at the end of a client engagement or a project? Ooh, okay, more people need to be doing that. So, Christina, what kind of debriefs do you guys do? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really good. It's excellent to do a postmortem. Somebody else raised their hands that you do? Yes.
Ours are more based on sorting out like the resources and products and byproducts that we created during the project, making sure that we know where they all are and available next time. That sort of thing.
That's also a really good strategy. So,
We have like 10 different people. Like it might be on somebody's drive or it might be on GitHub. Oh, yeah. That's what we're worried about.
Those are both really good strategies. So to repeat it, because this is also being recorded for people watching at home. So Christina's team does more sort of a lessons learned, what went well, what didn't went well, group vent. And your team, what was your name?
Lex.
So Lex's team also does a kind of more practical consolidation of where are all the folders, where is all the stuff, and what's repurposable. But one of the things I found is helpful is to also do what I call the during mortem, which is collect information while a project is still ongoing and you can course correct. This is also something that I assign as homework. So this is legit something that is a common best practice. Have people document, especially new learning, while it is happening. Because this can become an enormous, first of all, especially if you've got a team of people who are people of goodwill, if you've got a client who's being very difficult and they only vent at the end, maybe people were having challenges with that client the whole time. And at the same time, if everybody's having a problem with a certain tool and they can only vent at the end, well, maybe we could have cut it loose if we had all compared notes before it got to the end. So I like to schedule during mortems where we just check in with each other, sometimes just very informally, maybe at the end of a really intense day, and say, how do we think that went? Especially if we're learning something new, like we are integrating a completely different back-end warehousing system with an e-commerce system that we've never done before, because it's a unique one-off type of thing. A roll your own that we're integrating with a standard e-commerce platform. Then we might kind of touch base on a daily basis and say, all right, what did you learn about this new implementation? Can you share this with everybody else who's working on the team? And I will go so far as to, if I just learned something super cool and I want to share it with my team, I will do it twice, and the second time I will record it using Screencast-O-Matic and I will upload it to Asana or email it around to people, so that if I just learned how to do something super cool, I don't wait till the end of the project to tell everybody else about it. I share it right now because somebody else could be working on a similar project and they might need to know how to do that right now. So what I also do is I incentivize people to document what they're doing. In other words, if you just discovered something super cool and you want to share it with your others, I'm going to start giving people like a gift certificate to something. Or if somebody solves a really difficult problem, I'll give them a gift certificate to something. But that is one of the ways you can document lessons learned while they're being learned, so that that knowledge becomes immediately useful to the other people on the same project, as well as to other people within your organization on different projects. So this is a good time to kind of pause and ask people a question about, this is an ask for people, isn't it? Asking them, all right, not only did you just learn how to do something, but I'm going to ask you to teach your peers, and I'm also going to ask that you take time out of your already super busy day and document what you just learned and maybe make you do a Screencast-O-Matic or something like that. So do you guys document lessons learned? Who here documents lessons? How do you do that? How do you make it comfortable for people? Lisa.
The thing that I like to do most often is to create help pages within and make sure I write them down pages about how to create a couple.
Excellent. That's a really good idea.
And I try to keep everything about a big team that.
Yes. Everything needs to be in one place. You're good. Yes, you. Mhm. Mhm. That's excellent. Yes. Mhm. 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 That's fantastic. That is a really good best practice. Did I see any hands raised on this side? No. Okay, so I will move along. So another thing that I found is the ultimate enemy of all projects is our buddy scope creep. Scope creep is insidious. Now, giant scope creep is easy to catch. You know, you can have people say, oh, well, while you're building that e-commerce solution, can you also do the SEO? And we need a new template for our newsletter. And you're like, sure, that will be XX amount. And they'll be like, oh, I didn't think there'd be an extra charge for it. That is classic scope creep. You can whap it down as fast as possible. But there's what I call tiny scope creep, especially as my team has grown. There are all the little bitty yeses where you don't necessarily, as a project manager, even know, if you're not the only person handling the client, that people are getting these asks. Hey, can you do some photography for our blog? Sure. It will be X amount. But, you know, someone could ask someone who's new, and they'll be, at the end of the day or at the end of the week, they'll say, oh, and I did the photos for their blog, and you'll be like, why? And then, of course, the client didn't think that they were going to get billed for that. So those tiny little yeses, although obviously, can you do the photography for my blog is not exactly a tiny yes, but they're small ones. Like, can you just go in and quickly edit this template for our email newsletter so that it looks more like that landing page you just designed? Little bitty yeses. So what I want to do with my team, and I'm getting better and better at this, and I highly recommend it. We've caught things with this. I've caught a lot of things like that, is the longer you allow little yeses to come from everyone on your team, the more the client is going to rob you blind. Not necessarily on purpose, it's just that you're so helpful. The worst thing anyone ever said to me is back when I didn't have my own shop, I worked for somebody else, saying, you know, your boss has been saying no to me all the time lately, so I've been talking to you lately because you're always so helpful. I realized, oh no, I've become that person. So unless you all want to become the person who's always so helpful, in other words, allowing scope creep, it actually makes sense to nip scope creep in the bud as early as possible. Every week when you meet and talk about what's been going on, have your spidey senses out for signs of scope creep. Oh, well, she asked me whether I could take a look at her personal tweets and give her advice. Allow people to be very forthcoming, have open-ended conversations, and when scope creep happens, you want to catch it within days and communicate to the client that this is extra, or we're just not going to do it. Because if it has gone on for a week or two, they've already had their expectations reset that you are open to scope creep. So, and that can really derail a project, even if they're paying fairly for the extra scope. You're pushing the end of the project out because you're loading things down. And if you don't go back to the scope of work and say, hey, we promised X to them by the end of August, but now they've asked for X, Y, Z, and now they're going back to A, B, C, and D, but no one's gone back and told them and said, you know, in addition to this costing an extra $10K, it's also going to take an extra 3 months. If you don't say that to them early, they're going to be really upset because they figured that paying extra was all that they were going to do, or sending you more files was all they were going to do, and now it's late, but it's not late. They've asked for triple the work. But if you don't communicate that early and often, you are the one who has created the problem. So make sure that you are weekly pulling out your scope of work, because it's so easy to forget what you promised to do, especially if the client is not trying to unfairly not pay. Like they're hiring you for more and more, and you're getting really excited because now they're becoming a bigger and bigger client. But look back at the scope of work of what else is in there. Were certain timelines promised that are now no longer realistic, because in your excitement to have a client sign up for more and more, you'll have to do that reality check. Another thing that I see happening from time to time that can derail a project, segueing here and going back to the point of documenting lessons learned, is team changes. If there's a team change on your end, especially if you're working in-house, that's a little bit easier to control. But that's where having a library of knowledge resources helps tremendously. So maybe you hire new people because you're so busy and your project has gone from being on a 3-person team to an 8-person team. Well, now you've got 5 more people who are coming in on the middle of the project and are the new kid and are like, so what's been going on? You need to have knowledge libraries documenting what is going on. You also have to have peer training. So there's a young lady sitting in the back, my former intern, now content marketing associate, Kayla, and we hired some new people to handle some new clients. Guess who did not have to train them how to do social media management for our clients? Because Kayla trained them. So empower people to be peer trainers. You don't want to be the one training your entire team all the time, because now you're not a project manager anymore, you're a trainer. As your team grows, as you get more busy, make sure that people are empowered with enough information that's been documented, even if it's informally, that they can turn around and train the next person. But what if the worst happens and your client has team changes? Sometimes that does actually legitimately spell the end of the project. If your project sponsor has moved on, your project is probably in trouble. But it could be somebody where the project sponsor is still there, but you are directly reporting into somebody else, and there's been personnel changes there. That can also cause a lot of project unhappiness, because even though that person's job is to manage your project to fruition, they weren't there at the beginning when all of the enthusiasm and happiness was happening. It's almost like somebody going into a 10-year marriage on year 10. All the honeymoon phase is gone. It's over. You're not retired yet. You're in the tough part when you're buying groceries and the kids are writing on the walls. And that's your new boss coming in at like the tough part, the middle. And so you need to reignite that honeymoon phase with this random stranger who's coming in when the project is like 2 days behind here, 3 weeks ahead there. You're missing this file. They don't even know that you were supposed to get that file. And they're coming in, and maybe you're pretty unhappy at that point, or if you're not, or maybe you're enthusiastic, but you're just like, oh yeah, and that Google Flange file, and they're like looking at you completely blank. You've just lost their support. So you have to remember, even if only one person is new on the project, if they're over there with your client, you have to completely pretend like this project is starting from scratch. You have to spend the time to, again, go back to slide 1, communicate, communicate, communicate. Get them up to speed. Set aside, send them an email in their preferred style and channel, and say, hi, I understand that you are now going to be the person, I don't know, supplying us with copy. I want to take the time to get you up to speed with what's been going on with the project, because I know what it's like to be new to a job, even if you don't know what it's like to be new to a job because you're in your first job. So I know what it's like to be new to a job. I want to make sure that you have everything you need from us, and I want us to start off on the right foot. Can you set aside maybe an hour for me to come and visit you? And show up with cookies if you have to. And don't necessarily ask for a full hour, ask for half an hour. But set aside the time to get that person re-kicked off, even if they're not the main stakeholder, and things will go unbelievably better. Just don't assume that the person's been briefed by the person who left the job, or if they're completely new personnel that all the rest of the team briefed them. They're probably very underprepared. It's almost, I have yet to encounter somebody who jumped into a new project midway, especially when they were the client, and had been adequately like 100% briefed and knew everything and didn't have any ramp up time. You be the ramp up time and you resell your services to that person and you have a wonderful ongoing relationship with the new person then. So remember how I told you I've been balancing sometimes 12 projects? Well, you know, this is how I did it. First thing, some of the projects, if you have taken on too many, might not be worth it, and you shouldn't have taken them on in the first place. So I have really learned to see red flags because I have found that if you're feeling overwhelmed, you have at some point made one of these classic mistakes. Because if you're not, no matter how many projects you have, you're not feeling overwhelmed if you have a reasonably set up project because you probably had adequate ramp up time. Maybe you were able to hire or outsource for people. So if you feel like you're drowning, that's a big red flag already that you have one trouble project out there somewhere. So if you're working on external projects for clients, number one, I have learned the hard way about 5 times, and now I'm finally going to never do this again. If somebody comes back to you 3 times asking to take things out of the scope because they can't afford scope 1, then they can't afford scope 2, then they start scuttling things that are actually vital to the project into scope 3. Like, I know we asked for email marketing, but do we really need a template? That seems expensive. Just run. Run as fast and far as you possibly can, because no matter how tiny a scope you've created, thinking, okay, all right, they can't afford 90% of what they need, but we'll give them that 10% for that tiny little price that they can pay, and hopefully we'll grow with them. No, because you know that original scope with everything they actually need that you quoted them first? They think they're still getting that for 1/10 of the price. I have seen this over and over again. It doesn't matter how clearly you communicate to them that, you know what, you said you couldn't pay for a template for your email, so we scuttled that. You're going to use something your brother-in-law did. They will call you 2 weeks later and say, I'm really unhappy. I thought I was getting a template. It always happens. It virtually always happens. So if someone keeps coming back, getting cheaper and cheaper in a smaller and smaller scope, after the second time, just run as fast and far as you can. The other thing is obviously serious red flags on this. Obviously, don't work with rude people. I've learned that. Just don't. They're never worth it, no matter how much money they're waving around. Lenient payment terms are even worse than shrinking the scope because they can't pay. So if somebody says, I can't do net 15 because I won't be paid in 15, can you do net 30? Well, when 30 days rolls around, they're going to call you and say, you know what, I really need you to do net 60. And this actually happened to me when I said, listen, I can't give you net 60. This client flipped out and said, you seem overly concerned with being paid. What kind of person doesn't work just because we're not paying you? Those words actually came out of a client's mouth. I've never seen anyone like this. What? Nobody else says they won't work just because we don't pay them. I was like, because you work with what? The deranged? I mean, not to stigmatize anybody, but, and so the first red flag was when they tried to negotiate longer and longer payment terms. Had I walked away then, I would not have had a very awkward conversation on the T, overheard by 25 strangers in the same train car. So don't just walk away. And honestly, I have learned the hard way. If somebody complains about how they've gone through like 4 web designers and they've all been terrible, that's like the person, to use the marriage analogy, who's been divorced 4 times. It wasn't the other people. It's never the other people. If someone says, I really hope you can finally finish this website because we've been through 4 web designers, you can say, oh, I'm moving to Antarctica. I'm sorry. Because it's not. And ask for the names, though, by the way, of who they worked with. And if it's people you know and respect, and Boston's a small town, we all kind of know each other. And if you're like, that's strange that they were unhappy with X, Y, and Z, they're awesome, that's the final clue you need. But also I've learned that if you are working with someone who's inexperienced, if you're already flat out, you might want to hand them over to a smaller shop, because no matter how super nice an inexperienced client is, if they've never built a website, you're going to have to spend a lot of time educating them. And they could be an ultra sweetheart, and it's going to turn into one of 2 things. Well, 3. One is you actually pad in enough time to educate them. And you add another 30% to the scope to talk to them about, oh, well, this is why we need to have a payment backend, because it's an e-commerce site. And really obvious things that you don't even know. And by the way, put your best communicator on an inexperienced client. Because the biggest challenge I find when inexperienced client projects go off the rails is because you've been doing it so long and you've worked with awesome clients who know everything, you forget to explain things that to you and everybody else are obvious, and they feel left in the dark because you didn't explain to them what SEO means, for instance. And so you need to have someone who's really good and patient with educating people. If you don't have that person, don't take on the client, because they will either become unhappy or they will become so needy that they, again, like the person who needs to be communicated with in an unusual way, they will cost you too much. That doesn't mean you should never work with an inexperienced client, but you should know what you're getting into and know that it's going to have to be a more ample scope. And don't necessarily say to the client, and I had this question asked to me at the last project management workshop, don't necessarily say, because you don't know what you're doing, we're going to charge you 30% extra. You can't say that. Just say, this is the rate, this is how long it's going to take, and actually plan. I mean, my company has its own education arm where we teach people digital marketing and social media, and it came out of little mini workshops I gave to inexperienced clients to teach them enough of what we were doing so that they could support us and they could understand the value of what we were doing. You need to do that even if you're sending them YouTube videos, which gets me to ROI. So measuring ROI for a project is critical to keep that support from the client or from the end user. Waiting till the end to say, and we got this done 2 weeks early and 2K under budget, yay us. If the project goes on for 6 months and you only wait till the end to have that little yay us conversation, your client has already possibly started to love you less. Do not be afraid to toot your own horn. In other words, if you get something done 2 days in advance or 3 weeks in advance, or you solve a really thorny problem for the client, don't be afraid to provide some metrics that we are, this far under budget, we are this far in advance, even necessarily on a weekly basis, because good clients will love you for that level of reporting. Good clients will appreciate the fact that you are keeping them in the loop and educating them and informing them. And I found that it drives bad clients crazy to find out you're doing a good job, because there's always that 5% of humanity who are mad at the world and hate everybody, and who see a subcontractor coming into the room as an opportunity to have an emotional punching bag that they can't have within their office. And if you're constantly confronting them with documented evidence that you're doing a good job, then their desperate need to be a screamer hasn't got a vent with you. And then they have to go yell at their own team. So again, you have a bunch of different really good opportunities to make happy clients even happier and keep unhappy people who just need to, abuse people at bay. It's also really good to upsell. Because if you say, hey, we're behind this far on budget, you've got this much left, and you've got this much time left, what if they had other stuff that they wanted to give to another vendor, but now because you are doing such an awesome job, then you seem to have capacity and they like working with you. And this has happened to me a lot. If you say, hey, we're ahead on this, they'll say, oh, okay, well then, can you also do this for me? And then if you rescope and you say it'll be X extra and they say, oh, that's fine, you know that you're upselling that person with more services and becoming a more valued partner to them. So that's another really good reason to keep providing them with metrics, because they'll see that you're transparent, that you're easy to work with, you're not keeping them in the dark, and then they'll realize, oh, we should do X, Y, and Z. So supplying details on industry ROI of best practices at each milestone is something that I've learned to do. So what I mean by this is sometimes you don't have a really good metric. Like let's say you're building a website and it's going along and you don't know what the ROI of that website is because it's not up yet. So you're just sort of chunking along. And you don't really have an ROI in the terms of the dollar value of what you're doing. You've got the measurements of like, okay, we're ahead of schedule or we've accomplished this or that extra thing, but you don't really have ROI. So what I also like to throw in is if we're doing something, so unlike some web design and development shops, we also do SEO and we integrate different back-end systems for people. So a lot of clients don't always know the value, the extra value add of the fact that we're also doing SEO for them. So I will like email them with little articles that I saw in Mashable or Search Engine Land where we tell them, oh, well, according to the latest report from Forrester, SEO has a 4x ROI. Yay us, yay you. And I send it to them, and those are good ways to give people an objective touch point to realize the value of the services that you're providing. So take that little extra time, and if you're doing a lot of projects that are very similar to each other, it doesn't take a lot of time. Because if you're doing SEO for 8 different clients, you can send the same article to everybody. By the way, don't address it to whom it may concern. Take the time to copy and paste it and say, dear, dear Susan, dear Bill, dear Brian, but make sure you don't really have to write different emails to everybody, but definitely offer proof. Because you have to remember you're also a teacher. All projects are learning opportunities, both for your team and also for your client. So I thought now, what time it is? 10:45. We're supposed to go till 11? About? Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes. I wanted to do a little bit of an exercise because, I mean, everyone just sort of kind of sits here, listens to stuff. We should do something fun. Okay. So I always like to think of every project as a learning opportunity, by which I mean, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, you're still learning because the web progresses so quickly that what worked in SEO 6 months ago doesn't work anymore. And if you're not staying on the cutting edge, you are falling behind and you're going to become, one of those vendors that doesn't provide top-notch service, but outdated stuff. And we've all taken apart sites where we're like, what were they thinking? So you want your team to continuously learn, and you want your client to learn from you so that they see you not just as a service provider who I give them some stuff to do and then they do it and then they send it to us, because that makes you a commodity. You stop being a commodity when you are helping everybody who touches your organization continuously learn. So include the time and effort for learning in every timeline. Put in an extra 10%, not just for those meetings where what did we learn, and not just to educate the inexperienced client, but to educate the experienced client, because they love that. That makes you a more valued person. And the easiest way to do that is actually very informally. So you could have one of these things where you have a proactive mentorship system, and we'll have to leave this for another session, but you could also just turn to each other and teach each other something. So if it's your own internal team, what I always recommend is you evaluate people's skills at the beginning of each project and develop a skills plan. If somebody can do 100% of what's expected to them, I would worry very, very much, because they're going to quit one day. If you only have them at 100% of what they already know how to do and they're not learning anything, that's one of the #1 reasons why people leave perfectly otherwise good jobs. I loved my boss, I loved the people, it was a good commute, but I was so bored, is not always just a nonsense thing people say to explain why they quit. They quit because they were bored. So that's a red flag. If someone can do 90% of the work expected, then they can probably learn most of that informally by talking to their neighbor or asking you. But I honestly say the sweet spot is often if somebody can do 80% of what is expected of them, because then they're learning just enough to stay excited, but they're not at that stage where so much is new to them that they're making mistakes, and some of those mistakes are costing you. 70% is back into red flag zone. So there's a very small sweet spot where people are at optimum flow. And you want to keep people at optimum flow in order to keep your team happy and your organization growing. So that's how you do internal. How you do external, again, it's very informal. It goes back to measuring ROI. You educate your client on something that is either something you did for them that was above and beyond what they expected, but that you felt was necessary and obviously was in the scope, but they didn't necessarily know how important that was, like adding SEO tags to all of the pages. Or if you feel the urgent need to upsell them on something, and by upsell, I don't mean like a cynical, we want to, take them for all they're worth. I mean, it's like, okay, their email looks terrible. We've done a beautiful website for them and their email looks awful. It's kind of almost like a fiduciary duty to tell them that and either hire us to do a new newsletter email template for you or hire somebody, but you really need to do this because otherwise you're not going to get the value out of what we did. And that kind of educating the client can happen very informally, and it works best when it comes from your personal passion. So I want everybody in the room to turn to your neighbor, unless you came with your coworkers, in which case you should turn to somebody in front or behind you, and say one thing that you either hope to learn today, already learned just from looking at the agenda or from one of the earlier sessions, or that you learned from your reading that you're super excited about and you think that everyone should be doing it. It doesn't even have to be in web design. You could have just learned that kale is terrible for you and we can all stop eating it. But if you just learn something that gets super excited, presume your neighbor doesn't know anything about it, is a lay person, needs to be educated on it, and tell them about it with the most enthusiasm you can. Or none whatsoever if it's... Okay, it looks like we are almost at time. So I wanted to wrap up really quickly and ask, there's a lot of really good conversation going on. What was the one thing that you learned? Or, yes. Awesome. Awesome. What did you guys share? Yeah. Oh, you guys back there. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, and you guys were also having a great conversation.
General project management tricks to keep it on track.
Yes, yes. Well, I wanted to thank everybody as you are shifting over to your other rooms. I know that we're kind of at time, so if you have any questions, please tweet me at LearnSleek. That's our company's handle. We are having a workshop on digital content September 24th at CIC Boston. I'm also thinking of putting together a project management camp, so if you're interested, just please tweet at me, I'm in, and we will have something similar for project managers. And thank you, everybody.